I'm standing in a boardroom that costs more than my entire life used to be worth. Marble floors. Windows so tall they make you feel small. And sitting around this long table are the same people who threw me out like garbage 3 weeks ago. My aunt who locked the door in my face. My cousin who wouldn't even look at me. My mother who said I was an embarrassment to the Carter name. Now they're all smiles. All please and thank you. All acting like they didn't leave me shivering in the rain with nothing but a bag and broken pride. You want to know what changed? The boy I saved happens to be worth more money than any of us will ever see in 10 lifetimes. And now, suddenly, I'm family again. My name is Christiana Carter, and I'm 27 years old. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house where love came with conditions and mistakes came with consequences. I worked doubles at a diner just to make rent. I dated a man for 4 years who promised me forever and gave me nothing. When that relationship ended, my family didn't ask if I was okay. They asked what people would think. That's when they decided I was the problem. That's when they decided I had to go. 3 weeks ago, my aunt put my belongings in a trash bag and set it on the porch. It was raining so hard I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say anything. She just closed the door, and I heard the lock click. I stood there soaking wet, thinking about how I had nowhere to go and nobody to call. That's the moment you realize how alone you really are. That's the moment everything you thought was solid turns to dust in your hands. I walked for hours that night. My phone was dead. My shoes were falling apart. And I ended up on a corner near a closed gas station off Route 35, trying to figure out which direction led to the cheapest motel I could find. That's when I saw him. A boy, maybe 12 years old, crouched behind a dumpster with his arms wrapped around his knees. He was drenched. Shaking. His eyes locked on mine, and I saw something I recognized. Fear. The kind that lives in your chest and chokes you when you try to breathe. I walked over slowly. Didn't want to scare him. I asked his name. He said Jace. I asked where his parents were. He said he ran away. I asked if he was hurt. He shook his head, but his hands were trembling so hard he couldn't hold them still. I should have called someone. I should have walked away. But I couldn't leave a kid out there in the storm. Not when I knew exactly how it felt to have no one. So I took his hand, and we walked together to a motel 2 miles down the road. The room smelled like cigarettes and mildew. The bed had a stain I didn't want to think about. But it was warm, and the door locked, and that was enough. We slept in our clothes that night. Jace didn't say much. He just stared at the ceiling like he was waiting for something bad to happen. I didn't push him. I figured he'd talk when he was ready. But what I didn't know is that this kid wasn't just some runaway. And saving him was about to flip my entire world upside down. The next few days were survival mode. I picked up a breakfast shift at a diner across town. Jace stayed in the room and watched TV. I brought him food. He barely touched it. He was too calm for a kid who just ran away from home. Too careful. He watched the door like someone was going to kick it in. He flinched every time a car drove past. And when I asked him questions, he answered just enough to make me stop asking. On the 4th night, I came back from my shift and found him staring out the window. There were 2 black SUVs parked across the street. Tinted windows. Engines running. Jace's face had gone completely white. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer. I asked again. That's when he finally looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Guilt. He said his real name wasn't Jace. It was Julian. Julian Vaughn. And his father didn't just own a business. He owned shipping companies, land, buildings, political connections that stretched across the state. Julian ran away because his mother died 6 months ago, and after she was gone, the family turned into wolves. Everyone fighting over money, over power, over who got to control what. And Julian was caught in the middle of it, being used like a chess piece by people who didn't care if he broke. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just some kid. This was someone people were looking for. Someone powerful people wanted back. And I had been hiding him in a $40 a night motel like it was some kind of safe house. What would you do if saving a stranger flipped your entire world upside down? Subscribe because what happens next will shake you. My phone started buzzing that same night. Calls from numbers I hadn't heard from in weeks. My aunt, my cousin, even my mother. All of them suddenly concerned. All of them suddenly sorry. I didn't answer. I knew exactly what this was. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I had. Or rather, who I had. By morning, the SUVs were still there. Julian was pacing the room like a caged animal. I told him we needed to figure this out. He nodded, but didn't say anything. That's when someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp knocks. Deliberate. I looked at Julian. His eyes were wide. I looked at the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had 2 choices. Open the door and face whatever was on the other side. Or grab Julian and run. I had seconds to decide. Seconds to choose between fear and faith. And whatever I chose was going to change everything. I reached for the doorknob. I opened the door expecting threats. Maybe cops. Maybe worse. But standing there was a man in a suit that probably cost more than my car used to be worth. Tall. Calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you're in control. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said his name was Pierce, head of security for Lincoln Vaughn. And he wasn't here to take Julian. He was here to thank me. Thank me. Like I'd done something noble instead of just being a decent human being. Pierce said Lincoln had been looking for Julian for 6 days. 6 days of fear and private investigators and every resource money could buy. And here I was, some broke waitress who stumbled into his son by accident. Pierce handed me a card with an address on it and said Lincoln wanted to meet me. Today. Now. I looked at Julian. He nodded. So I grabbed my bag and we got into the back of one of those black SUVs that had been watching us. The leather seats were softer than any bed I'd ever slept in. The windows were so dark I couldn't see outside. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe we weren't running anymore. Maybe we were safe. But that feeling didn't last long. We drove for 30 minutes into a part of town I'd only seen on postcards. Gates. Fountains. Houses that looked like museums. The car stopped in front of a mansion that made my chest tighten. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. The kind of power that crushes people like me without even noticing. I didn't belong here. I knew that. But Julian grabbed my hand and squeezed, and I realized he needed me to be brave even if I wasn't. Lincoln Vaughn was waiting in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a garden I didn't have words for. He was older than I expected. 50 maybe? Silver hair. Tired eyes. He looked at Julian like he'd just gotten his son back from the dead. And then he looked at me. Really looked at me. Like he was trying to figure out what kind of person saves a stranger's kid and asks for nothing in return. He thanked me. Over and over. His voice cracked when he spoke. He said he didn't know how to repay me. I told him he didn't owe me anything. I just wanted Julian to be safe. Lincoln nodded slowly, and then he said something that made my stomach twist. He said I could stay. Guest house. No rent. No pressure. Just stay close while Julian adjusted. Make sure he felt safe. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run. This was too much. Too big. Too complicated. But Julian was staring at me with those same scared eyes from the gas station, and I realized he didn't trust anyone else. Not yet. So I said yes. I said I'd stay. And just like that, I went from homeless to living on an estate I couldn't even pronounce the name of. The guest house was bigger than any apartment I'd ever lived in. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen with appliances I didn't know how to use. A bathroom with a tub so deep you could drown in it. I sat on the bed that first night and cried. Not because I was happy. Because I was terrified. Terrified this was temporary. Terrified I'd mess it up. Terrified that people like me don't get to live like this without paying a price. And I was right. The next morning, my phone rang. My aunt. I answered out of habit. She was crying. Fake tears. Practice tears. She said she was so sorry for what happened. She said she panicked. She said family makes mistakes, but we forgive each other, right? I didn't say anything. I just listened to her lie. And then she asked where I was staying. Asked if I was okay. Asked if I needed anything. I hung up. But she didn't stop. My cousin called. Then my mother. Then people I hadn't talked to in years. All of them suddenly concerned. All of them suddenly family. They showed up at the estate with casseroles and apologies and smiles that didn't hide what they really wanted. They wanted in. They wanted access. They wanted to be close to the Vaughn name because they thought it would rub off on them. My mother brought flowers. She hugged me like she hadn't thrown me away 3 weeks ago. She asked about Julian. Asked about Lincoln. Asked how long I was staying. And when I didn't answer fast enough, she got quiet. That dangerous kind of quiet. She said I should remember where I came from. Said I should remember who raised me. Said family takes care of family. I told her family doesn't lock doors in the rain. Julian started calling me Chris. Not Christiana. Just Chris. He followed me everywhere. Kitchen. Garden. Even sat outside the bathroom door when I showered because he didn't want to be alone. Lincoln noticed. He said Julian hadn't smiled in months, but he smiled when I was around. He said I was good for his son. And then he offered me something I didn't see coming. A job. Not charity. A real job. Julian's companion. His guardian when Lincoln couldn't be there. Salary. Benefits. Health insurance I'd never had in my life. I didn't know what to say. This was more than I'd ever been offered. More than I thought I deserved. But Lincoln said I'd already proven I'd protect Julian with nothing. Now he just wanted to make sure I could do it without struggling. I said yes. Again. And just like that, I went from diner waitress to part of a world I didn't understand. But not everyone was happy about it. Lincoln had a sister. Vanessa. She was the kind of woman who looked at you like you were dirt on her shoe. She smiled when Lincoln was around, but when he wasn't, her face turned cold. She asked me questions that sounded polite but felt like traps. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Did I have a degree? I answered honestly. Working class. No degree. Diner jobs and rent I could barely pay. She nodded like she'd expected that. Like it confirmed something she already believed. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said people like me don't usually last long in places like this. She said it with a smile. Like she was giving me advice. But I heard the threat underneath. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what she said. About how I didn't belong. About how everyone could see it. I walked through the guest house, touching furniture that cost more than I used to make in a month, and I felt like a fraud. Like I was playing pretend in someone else's life. And eventually, it would all fall apart. I was right about that too. 2 days later, I was walking past Lincoln's office when I heard Vanessa on the phone. The door was cracked. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have kept walking. But I heard my name and I froze. She was talking to someone. Her voice was low. Sharp. She said the girl was a problem. Said poor people always want more. Said they needed to handle this before I got ideas. Handle this. Handle me. Like I was something to manage. Something to remove. Ever had someone crawl back after they threw you away? Drop a comment if you've lived this. And subscribe. Betrayal comes in layers here. I didn't confront her. Not then. I just walked away and tried to breathe. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering what handle this meant. Couldn't stop feeling like the walls were closing in. I wanted to tell Lincoln, but what would I say? Your sister doesn't trust me? That sounded paranoid. That sounded like I was causing problems. So I kept quiet. I kept my head down. I kept doing my job. But Vanessa's words sat in my chest like a stone. And every time she looked at me, I wondered when she was going to make her move. I didn't have to wait long. Vanessa made her move on a Tuesday. I was sitting in the garden with Julian, helping him with homework, when she walked over with that same cold smile. She asked if we could talk. Alone. Julian looked at me. I told him it was fine. He didn't believe me, but he left anyway. Vanessa sat down across from me, and for a minute, she didn't say anything. Just stared. Like she was deciding how to start. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Thick. Heavy. She slid it across the table and said it was $50,000. Cash. All I had to do was leave. Pack my things. Disappear. Stop confusing Julian. Stop playing house. Stop pretending I belonged in a world I'd never understand. I stared at that envelope. $50,000. More money than I'd ever seen. Enough to start over. Enough to get an apartment, a car, a life that didn't depend on anyone else. And all I had to do was walk away from a kid who trusted me. A kid who'd already been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love him. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at that envelope. And then I pushed it back across the table. I told her Julian wasn't a job I could quit. I told her I didn't save him for money. I saved him because it was the right thing to do. And no amount of cash was going to make me leave him now. Her face changed. The smile disappeared. She leaned forward and said I was making a mistake. Said people like me don't say no to people like her. Said I'd regret this. Then she stood up, took the envelope, and walked away. I sat there shaking. Not because I was scared. Because I was angry. Angry that she thought I could be bought. Angry that she thought so little of me. But I wasn't the only one who was angry. Julian saw the whole thing from the window. He came running out, and I could see the panic in his eyes. He asked what she said. I told him it was nothing. He didn't believe me. He grabbed my arm and said his aunt was dangerous. Said she wanted his dad's company. Said she'd do anything to get it. And I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about control. About power. About a family tearing itself apart over money. That night, Lincoln called me into his office. He looked tired. Older than he had a week ago. He said he wanted to talk about Julian's future. Said he was getting older and his health wasn't what it used to be. Said he needed to make sure Julian was protected no matter what happened. Then he slid papers across the desk. Legal documents. Custody arrangements. If anything happened to Lincoln, I would be Julian's legal guardian. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a life. A responsibility. A promise that if Lincoln died, I'd raise his son. I asked why me? Why not family? He said family was the problem. Said his sister had already tried to have him declared unfit. Said his nephew was circling like a vulture. Said the only person who'd ever put Julian first was me. A stranger who had nothing to gain. I didn't sign right away. I told him I needed time to think. But deep down, I already knew my answer. Julian needed someone who'd fight for him. Someone who wouldn't sell him out. Someone who'd choose him over money. And somehow, impossibly, that person was me. 2 days later, everything exploded. There was a board meeting. Vanessa. Lincoln. Lawyers. Accountants. People in suits who didn't smile. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Lincoln asked me to sit in. Said he wanted witnesses. Vanessa stood up and gave a speech about Lincoln's declining health. About his inability to make sound decisions. About how he was being manipulated by people who didn't have the family's best interests at heart. She didn't say my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Lincoln didn't flinch. He pulled out financial records. Medical records. Proof that he was sound. Proof that Vanessa had been siphoning money from company accounts for years. Proof that she'd been planning a takeover long before I ever showed up. The room went silent. Vanessa's face turned red. She said he was lying. Said he was desperate. Said he'd rather destroy the family than admit he was wrong. That's when Julian walked in. I don't know how he got past security. I don't know how long he'd been listening. But he stood in that doorway, and his voice was steady when he spoke. He said his aunt and his cousin Marcus tried to keep him quiet. Said they told him his dad didn't want him anymore. Said they made him feel like he was the problem. And then he said the worst part. He said he heard them talking. Heard them say that if his dad had an accident, everything would be easier. The room exploded. Lawyers shouting. Vanessa screaming. Lincoln on his feet, demanding answers. And Julian just stood there, shaking, tears running down his face. I ran to him. Pulled him out of that room. Held him while he cried. Would you take the money and run, or stay and fight? Comment your choice. Subscribe because this decision changes everything. We went back to the guest house. Julian wouldn't let go of me. He kept saying he was sorry. Sorry for dragging me into this. Sorry for being a problem. I told him he wasn't a problem. I told him he was brave. I told him he did the right thing. But I was scared. Scared of what Vanessa would do next. Scared that we'd just made everything worse. I was right to be scared. The next morning, Julian woke up sick. fever, vomiting, shaking so hard he couldn't stand. I called for help. Lincoln's doctor came immediately, ran tests, drew blood, and when the results came back, his face went pale. He pulled me aside and said Julian's symptoms were consistent with poisoning. Low grade, slow acting, something that would make him sick but not kill him. Not right away. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Someone poisoned him. Someone in this house fed him something that was slowly breaking his body down. And I hadn't noticed. I hadn't protected him. I looked at Julian lying in that bed, pale and sweating, and I realized how close we'd come to losing him. The doctor said we needed to call the police. Lincoln agreed. But before we could, Julian opened his eyes and whispered something that froze my blood. He said it was Marcus, his cousin. Marcus had been bringing him snacks every night. Cookies, juice boxes, things Julian thought were just Marcus being nice. But they weren't. They were poison. Slow, calculated, designed to make Julian sick enough that Lincoln would be distracted. Sick enough that Vanessa could make her move. How long has he been in that house, I thought. How long has he been in danger and no one noticed? I wanted to scream. I wanted to find Marcus and make him pay. But instead, I stayed with Julian. Held his hand. Promised him he was safe now. Promised him no one would hurt him again. But I didn't know if I could keep that promise. The police came within the hour. 2 detectives. Notebooks. Recorders. They asked Julian questions. Gentle questions. Careful questions. He told them everything. The snacks. The juice boxes. The way Marcus always made sure no one else was around when he gave them to Julian. The detectives wrote it all down. Then they went to find Marcus. He wasn't hard to find. He was in the main house, sitting in the kitchen like nothing had happened. The detectives took him in for questioning. Vanessa followed, screaming about harassment and lawsuits and how they had no proof. But they did. The hospital ran tests on Julian's blood. Found traces of a sedative. Something you'd use to calm animals. Something that, in small doses over time, would make a child weak. Sick. Manageable. Marcus denied everything at first. Said Julian was lying. Said I'd coached him. Said this was all a scheme to steal the Vaughn fortune. But when the detective searched his room, they found the rest of the sedative. Hidden in a drawer. Along with emails between him and Vanessa. Emails planning how to make Lincoln look unfit. How to make Julian seem unstable. How to take control of everything. Vanessa was arrested 2 days later. Conspiracy. Attempted harm. Fraud. The news picked it up. Local reporters. Then bigger outlets. The Vaughn family was front-page news. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know who I was. The woman who saved Julian. The woman who wasn't family but became family. The woman who stayed when everyone else left. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. But it wasn't reporters. It was my family. My mother. My aunt. My cousin. All of them calling to explain. To apologize. To beg. My mother said she didn't mean to throw me out. Said she was scared. Said she made a mistake. My aunt said she thought she was doing what was best. Said I'd understand if I had kids of my own. My cousin said they needed help. Said they were struggling. Said now that I was connected to the Vaughns, couldn't I do something? I listened to every voicemail. Every excuse. Every plea. And then I blocked every number. I was done. Done pretending they loved me. Done pretending blood meant anything when it came with conditions. They didn't want me. They wanted what I had. And I wasn't going to give them a single thing. But my mother didn't stop. She showed up at the estate. Got past the gate by lying to security. Said she was my mother and it was an emergency. By the time I found out, she was already at the guest house. Knocking. Calling my name. I opened the door and there she stood. Tears in her eyes. Hands shaking. Playing the role of the hurt mother who just wanted her daughter back. I didn't let her in. I stood in the doorway and told her to leave. She said we were family. I said family doesn't abandon people in the rain. She said I was being cruel. I said I learned from the best. She said I owed her. I asked what I owed her for. For raising me? For feeding me? For giving me a roof that came with conditions and love that disappeared the second I wasn't perfect? She didn't have an answer. She just cried harder. Said I'd changed. Said the Vaughns had poisoned me against my own family. I told her the Vaughns didn't have to do anything. She did that herself. Then I closed the door. And I didn't look back. Lincoln saw the whole thing from his window. He called me into his office later that night and said he was sorry. Sorry that my family was like this. Sorry that I had to deal with them on top of everything else. I told him it wasn't his fault. He said he wanted to help. Said he was setting up a trust. Not charity. Not payment. But family. Because that's what I was now. Family. I cried. I'm not ashamed to say it. I cried because for the first time in my life, someone saw me. Really saw me. Not what I could do for them. Not what I was worth. Just me. And they decided I was enough. The trial happened fast. Marcus took a plea deal. 3 years. Vanessa fought. Hired expensive lawyers. Played the victim. Said she was just trying to protect the family business. Said Lincoln was old and confused. Said I was manipulating him. But the evidence didn't lie. The emails. The sedative. Julian's testimony. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Probation. Restraining order. She couldn't come near Julian or Lincoln again. We won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. Julian was quiet for weeks after the trial. He didn't talk much. Didn't smile. Just stayed close to me like he was afraid I'd disappear. Lincoln took him to therapy. Got him help. But I knew what Julian needed most was time. Time to trust again. Time to feel safe again. Time to be a kid again. One night, I found him sitting outside, staring at the stars. I sat down next to him, and he asked me why I stayed. Why I didn't take Vanessa's money. Why I didn't leave when things got hard. I told him the truth. I stayed because he needed me. And because walking away from someone who trusted me would have made me just like the people who walked away from me. He nodded. Didn't say anything for a long time. Then he leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered thank you. Blood doesn't mean loyalty. If this story is hitting home, subscribe. And comment below, have you ever had to walk away from family? A week later, Lincoln called me into his office. He had papers in his hand. Legal documents. He said his health wasn't great. Said he needed to make sure Julian was taken care of. Said he wanted me to be Julian's legal guardian. Not temporary. Permanent. If anything happened to him, Julian would be mine. I signed the papers. My hands were shaking. But I signed. Because Julian deserved someone who'd fight for him. Someone who'd choose him. Someone who'd never walk away. And somehow, that person was me. 3 months later, Lincoln had a health scare. Heart attack. Not fatal, but close. Close enough to remind all of us that time isn't guaranteed. He recovered, but everything shifted after that. He stepped back from the company. Spent more time with Julian. More time with me. More time being the father Julian needed instead of the businessman everyone expected. And me? I started school. Online classes. Lincoln insisted. Said I had a brain and it was time I got to use it. Said the foundation he was starting for runaway youth needed someone who understood what it felt like to have nothing. Someone who'd fight for kids the way I fought for Julian. So I studied. I learned. I became the person I'd always wanted to be. But my family didn't stop. One day, I was at the grocery store and I saw my aunt. She didn't see me at first. But when she did, her face lit up like we were old friends. She walked over. Smiled. Asked how I was. Asked about Julian. Asked if we could talk. I said no. She said she just wanted to apologize. I said I'd heard enough apologies. She said family forgives. I said family doesn't lock doors in the rain. She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. And I realized she wasn't powerful. She was just scared. Scared of being left behind. Scared of not having enough. Scared of people like me moving forward while she stayed stuck. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. But pity doesn't mean forgiveness. I walked away. And I didn't look back. Months passed. Julian turned 13. We threw him a party. Small. Just Lincoln, me, a few kids from his new school, and some staff who'd become like family. He smiled the whole day. Real smiles. The kind that reach your eyes. And when he blew out the candles, I saw the kid he was always supposed to be. Happy. Safe. Loved. That night, after everyone left, Julian asked me if I ever regretted it. Regretted saving him. Regretted staying. Regretted giving up the life I could have had. I told him the truth. I didn't give up anything. I gained everything. A family. A purpose. A life that mattered. He hugged me. Tight. The kind of hug that says I love you without words. And I realized something. I'd spent my whole life thinking I wasn't enough. Wasn't smart enough. Wasn't successful enough. Wasn't worthy of love unless I earned it. But Julian didn't care about any of that. He just cared that I stayed. That I chose him. That I loved him when no one else did. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. But the world wasn't done testing us yet. One day, a reporter showed up at the estate. She said she was writing a story about the Vaughn family. About the trial. About me. She wanted an interview. I said no. She said it would be good publicity for the foundation. I still said no. She said people deserve to know the truth. I told her the truth was simple. A kid needed help. I helped him. That's it. No hidden agenda. No master plan. Just one person choosing to do the right thing. She didn't like that answer. She wanted drama. Scandal. Conflict. But I didn't give it to her. And eventually, she left. 2 days later, the story came out anyway. And it wasn't the story I would have told. It painted me as a gold digger. A manipulator. A woman who preyed on a vulnerable family for money. It quoted anonymous sources. People who claimed to know me. People who said I'd always been opportunistic. People who were clearly my family. I read the article once. Then I threw my phone across the room. Julian found me crying in the guest house. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat next to me and held my hand. And after a while, I stopped crying. Because I realized something. People who didn't know me didn't matter. People who believed lies didn't deserve explanations. The only people who mattered were the ones sitting in this room. The ones who knew the truth. Lincoln handled the rest. Lawyers. Retractions. Threats of lawsuits. The article was taken down within 48 hours. But the damage was done. My name was out there. My face was in the news. And my mother saw an opportunity. She went on local television. Said she was my mother. Said she was worried about me. Said the Vaughns had isolated me from my family. Said I'd been manipulated. Said she just wanted her daughter back. She cried on camera. Played the victim. And people believed her. I watched the interview in Lincoln's office. My stomach turned. My hand shook. And I realized I had two choices. Stay silent and let her control the narrative. Or speak up and tell the truth. Lincoln said the choice was mine. Said he'd support me either way. I thought about it for a long time. Thought about what speaking up would cost. Thought about the scrutiny. The judgment. The ugliness. But then I thought about Julian. About the kids the foundation would help. About everyone who'd ever been thrown away by their family and told they weren't enough. And I realized I had to speak. So I did. I gave one interview. To a local reporter who promised to let me tell my story without twisting it. I told her about the breakup. The rain. The locked door. The gas station. Julian. Everything. I told her my mother hadn't called in 3 weeks until she found out I was connected to the Vaughns. I told her about the bribe. The lies. The way my family only wanted me when I became useful. The interview aired 2 days later. And the response was overwhelming. Messages. Emails. Comments. Thousands of people saying they'd lived the same story. People who'd been abandoned by family. People who'd been used. People who'd had to choose between blood and dignity. And every single one of them said thank you. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for showing them they weren't alone. My mother didn't respond. She just disappeared. Stopped doing interviews. Stopped calling. Stopped pretending. And I realized that's all she ever was. Pretend. Pretend love. Pretend concern. Pretend family. And I was finally free of it. Months passed. The foundation launched. We helped 12 kids in the first month. Runaways. Abuse survivors. Kids who had nowhere to go and no one to trust. We gave them shelter, therapy, education, a chance. And every time I met a new kid, I saw Julian. I saw me. I saw every person who'd ever been told they didn't matter. And I fought for them. The way someone should have fought for me. 1 year after the trial, Lincoln called a family meeting. Not his family. Ours. Me. Julian. The staff who'd become like parents and siblings. He said he had news. Good news. The foundation was growing faster than expected. We'd helped over 200 kids. And he wanted to expand. Open more locations. Hire more people. Make this bigger than any of us. He looked at me and said he wanted me to run it. Not just help. Run it. Be the face of it. The voice. The person who understood what these kids needed because I'd lived it. I didn't know what to say. This was bigger than anything I'd ever imagined. Bigger than I thought I was capable of. But Lincoln said I was ready. Said I'd been ready since the night I chose Julian over myself. So I said yes. And just like that, I went from diner waitress to executive director of a foundation that was changing lives. It didn't feel real. But every time I walked into our main location and saw kids who'd been given a second chance, I knew it was real. I knew it mattered. Julian thrived. He made friends. Got good grades. Started smiling again. He even joined the school's debate team and won his first competition. I sat in the audience that day, watching him stand at that podium, confident and articulate, and I cried. Because this was the kid who'd been hiding behind a dumpster a year ago. This was the kid who'd been poisoned by his own family. And now he was standing tall, using his voice, fighting for what he believed in. One night, we held a fundraiser at the estate. Donors. Board members. People who believed in what we were building. I gave a speech about second chances. About how one act of kindness can change everything. About how family isn't blood. It's choice. And when I finished, the room stood and applauded. Not because I was eloquent, but because they felt it. They understood. After the event, I found Lincoln sitting alone in his office. He looked tired but happy. He said he was proud of me. Proud of Julian. Proud of what we'd built together. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said his wife told him, before she died, that if anything ever happened, he should find someone who chooses love over blood. Someone who'd protect Julian not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He said he didn't believe he'd find that person. But then I walked into their lives. A stranger with nothing. And I gave them everything. I didn't know what to say. So I just hugged him. And for the first time since this all started, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. 3 months later, I was leaving the foundation office late one night when I saw a girl sitting on the curb. 14, maybe 15. What hair? Torn jacket. The same look Julian had that night at the gas station. Fear mixed with exhaustion, mixed with nowhere else to go. I stopped. Asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. But I could see she wasn't. I asked if she had somewhere to stay. She shook her head. I asked if she'd eaten. Another shake. I could have called the police. Could have called social services. Could have walked away and let someone else handle it. But I didn't. Because I knew what it felt like to be her. And I knew what it meant when someone stopped. I brought her to the foundation. Got her food. Clean clothes. A bed. She didn't talk much that first night. Just stared at the walls like she was waiting for the catch. Waiting for the moment when I'd ask for something in return. But I didn't ask for anything. I just told her she was safe. And she could stay as long as she needed. Her name was Iris. She'd run from a foster home where she wasn't safe. She'd been on the streets for 2 weeks. Sleeping in parks. Eating from trash cans. Avoiding cops and predators and everyone in between. She said she didn't trust adults. Didn't trust anyone. But something about me felt different. She didn't know why. She just knew. I worked with her over the next few weeks. Therapy. School enrollment. Legal support to get her out of that foster home and into a safe placement. She started to open up. Started to smile. Started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved good things. This story reminds us that sometimes losing everything is how you find what matters. If you believe in chosen family, subscribe. One day, Julian came with me to the foundation. He'd been asking to help. Wanted to meet the kids we were working with. Wanted to do something that mattered. I was nervous at first. Didn't want him to feel pressured. But he insisted. So I brought him. Iris was in the common room when we arrived. She looked up, saw Julian, and something shifted in her face. Recognition. Not of him, but of what he represented. Hope. Someone who'd made it through. Someone who'd survived. Julian sat down next to her, and they talked for over an hour. About music. About school. About what it feels like to not belong anywhere. When we left, Julian was quiet. I asked if he was okay. He said he was more than okay. He said talking to Iris reminded him of how far he'd come. Reminded him that he wasn't just a victim. He was a survivor. And survivors have a responsibility to help others survive too. I'd never been more proud of him. Months passed. Iris got placed with a family who actually cared. She called me every week. Sent updates. Photos. She was thriving. And every time I heard her voice, I thought about that night on the curb. About how close she'd come to disappearing. About how one decision to stop and ask if she was okay changed everything. The foundation grew. We opened a second location. Then a third. We hired people who'd lived it. People who understood what these kids needed because they'd needed it once too. And every single day, we changed lives. Not with money. Not with pity. But with choice. The choice to see someone. To stop. To care. Lincoln's health stabilized. He wasn't young anymore, but he was here. Present. Involved. He spent his mornings with Julian and his afternoons at the foundation. He said this was his legacy. Not the business. Not the money. But the lives we saved. The families we built. The kids who got a second chance because someone chose them. One evening, we held a small event at the foundation. Just the team. The kids. Some donors. Julian stood up to speak. He talked about the night he ran away. About hiding behind a dumpster in the rain. About thinking no one would ever care. And then he talked about me. About how I didn't have to stop. Didn't have to care. But I did. And that choice changed his life. He said he wanted to dedicate his life to doing the same thing. Helping kids who felt invisible. Kids who thought they didn't matter. Kids who just needed one person to choose them. The room was silent when he finished. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they felt it. The weight of it. The truth of it. After the event, we were cleaning up when a boy walked through the door. He looked about 12. Soaked from the rain. Shaking. Lost. The staff moved to help him, but Julian got there first. He knelt down, looked the boy in the eye, and said the exact words I'd said to him a year ago. "You're safe now." The boy started crying. Julian hugged him. And I watched from across the room, tears streaming down my face, because this was it. This was what it was all about. Not the foundation. Not the money. Not the recognition. But this. One person choosing to stop. To care. To save someone the way they were saved. Later that night, Julian and I sat on the porch of the guest house. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Julian looked at me and asked if I ever thought about that night. The gas station. The storm. The moment everything changed. I told him I thought about it every day. Thought about how I almost didn't stop. How I almost kept walking. How I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I almost missed him. And how grateful I was that I didn't. Because saving him didn't just change his life. It saved mine too. He smiled. That real smile. The one that reaches your eyes. And he said something I'll carry with me forever. He said I taught him that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Who stays. Who fights for you when everyone else walks away. And he said I'd be his family forever. Not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. We sat there for a long time. Not talking. Just being. And I realized something. I'd spent my whole life thinking I needed to earn love. Needed to be perfect. Needed to prove I was worth keeping. But that was never true. Love isn't something you earn. It's something you choose. And the people who matter will choose you back. My phone buzzed. A message from Iris. She'd gotten accepted to college. Full scholarship. She was going to study social work. Said she wanted to help kids like us. Kids who needed someone to choose them. I showed Julian the message and he grinned. See, he said. It spreads. He was right. Kindness spreads. Choice spreads. Love spreads. And every person we helped would go on to help someone else. And that someone would help another. And the cycle would continue. Forever. The next morning, we had a new intake. A girl. 16. Runaway. Scared. Julian asked if he could sit with her. I said yes. And as I watched him talk to her, saw her shoulders relax, saw her start to believe she was safe, I understood the full weight of what we were building. This wasn't just a foundation. It was a family. A chosen family. Built on kindness and second chances and the belief that everyone deserves someone who'll fight for them. Lincoln walked in and stood next to me. He didn't say anything. Just watched Julian with that girl. And then he put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. A year later, we held our first annual gala. Over 500 people. Donors. Supporters. Families we'd helped. Kids who'd made it through. Julian gave the keynote speech. He talked about the night he ran away. About the woman who stopped when she didn't have to. About how one choice changed everything. And then he introduced me. Not as the executive director, but as his mom. I wasn't expecting that. We'd never made it official. Never signed papers or gone to court. But in every way that mattered, I was his mom. And he was my son. The room erupted in applause. I walked to the stage, hugged him, and looked out at hundreds of faces. People who believed in what we were doing. People who wanted to be part of it. People who understood that family is choice. I gave a short speech. Thanked everyone. Talked about the kids we'd helped and the lives we'd changed. But mostly, I talked about Julian. About how he saved me just as much as I saved him. About how love isn't about biology. It's about showing up. Staying. Choosing. When I finished, I looked at Julian. He was crying. Happy tears. Proud tears. And I realized we'd come full circle. From that gas station. From that storm. From two broken people with nowhere to go. To this. A family. A foundation. A legacy built on love. That night, after everyone left, Julian and I walked through the empty hall. He looked at me and said, "We did it." I asked what he meant. He said, "We proved them wrong. Everyone who said we wouldn't make it. Everyone who said you weren't enough. Everyone who walked away. We proved love is stronger than blood." He was right. We did. Comment below, what's one moment that changed your life forever? As we walked out, I saw another kid sitting on the steps. Wet. Scared. Lost. Julian saw him too. We looked at each other, and without saying a word, we both knew what to do. We walked over. Sat down. And Julian said the words that started it all. "You're safe now. My mom and I, we help people like us." The boy looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes. And I knew right then that this was the life I was meant to live. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. Built on choice and love and the belief that everyone deserves someone who'll stop when they're hiding in the rain. This is what I learned. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who choose you. Who stay when everyone else leaves. Who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. And sometimes, the greatest blessings come disguised as storms. Because that storm brought me Julian. And Julian brought me home. Thank you for staying with Christiana and Julian's story. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Justice Ties for more stories of betrayal, strength, and redemption. You're part of this family now.